Shall we get started? So first of all, my name is Eric Malice. I am the Chief Product Officer, and I'm also the co-founder here at National Test Systems. I have over 21 years experience, and it has always been my focus to learn everything I could about drug testing, about the drugs themselves, how they interact with the human body, basically all things clinical toxicology, but especially as it relates to what we're doing, to drug testing. So we bring you these webinars because we feel education is hugely important. The more you know, it should make your daily drug testing duties a little bit easier, or at least a little bit more insightful. So I've lost count, but this is another in our ongoing series of educational webinars, and I'm glad you're all here. Thank you very much. These usually last about 15 to 20 minutes. Today's is maybe a little bit longer. It's a little more in depth. The information is a little more thorough. I'm going to try not to keep you here all day. Let me give you an example of that real quick. I was I attended a webinar about 2 weeks ago regarding drug testing. Was curious, obviously, to see what everyone else is doing. And after about 30 minutes, one of the other attendees put a question out to the administrator saying, "Hey, how long is this webinar? We're at 30 minutes already." And they said, "Oh, we expect the total to be about 90 minutes. And I'm like, "I don't have 90 minutes. I know you guys don't have 90 minutes. I've got work to do. You've got work to do." So I do try to keep these brief as possible. So when we talk about a subject that we're going to talk about today, we'll get to that obviously in a second, know that I'm giving you the short version because I do respect your time. I know you guys have work to do. I know you can't sit here with me for an hour and a half on my invite. Now, it's different if you find something on here that you like and you want a 90-minute dive on or a 2-hour dive on or whatever it might be. That's fine. I'm more than happy to do it, but it's got to be on your invite. In other words, it's got to be on the time that you've set aside to do this. If I'm pulling you to me, I can't be that disrespectful of your time. So just know, well, this one is a little longer than we usually like to get it. It's a lot more in-depth information. And again, anything on here that you want a deeper dive on, reach out. In fact, we do have a Q&A here at the end. In fact, if you look on the left pane, you'll see people, then questions is the second button. If you would, go ahead and ask any questions you have in the questions section. You can ask the question whenever. Just know I'm going to wait till the end of the presentation before I start answering them. And then along this webinar, there's another button, three more down from that called handouts. And if you click on handouts, you will see a PDF file. That is the file that we're going to be working from today. If you want to pull it up so you can view it, the print might be a little bit small, and I am going to have on the slide that I'm showing, as you can see a slideshow, obviously, on the slide will be the piece of section that I'm focusing on. So you may not need it now. You may want to save it for later so you can peruse it at your own leisure. But if you want to have it available, you want to follow along, absolutely, it's right there for you. If for some reason we don't get to everybody's questions today, just know that your consultant will reach out in the next couple of days in order to get to that question. They'll also give you an opportunity to request another topic of a webinar or a deeper dive on any of the subjects that we're talking about here today. Again, we feel it's very important to provide this education. And if you want to learn more about this stuff, you've got a fan in me. Just know that, because that's really what I'm all about. So if you peek at the handout, or if you read the title of the webinar today, you know what we're talking about. We're talking about the product insert. And this is a multi-page foldout that comes in every single box of drug tests that you buy. Whether it's called a product insert or the package insert, we're essentially talking about the same thing. And keep in mind, all medical devices and medications have product inserts. If you buy a box that has a bottle of aspirin in it, there's probably 10 pages in there telling you all about the aspirin. My wife just had her hip replaced. The hip that came with the packaging had a package insert. So it really has to do with all medical devices. And what it has typically is instructions, has methodology, has materials that are used, accuracy information, disposal information, and a whole host of other stuff. Now, again, we're not going to touch on everything today because I don't want to keep you here all day, but we're going to try and touch on the most important parts and things that, more than anything, this will give you an idea of what you have at your disposal. You have a product insert. I know most people don't read instructions when they buy anything, and that's fine. If you guys don't read the instructions, that keeps me a job. That's fine. But I want you to know what's in there and know that you have access to this in case it is ever needed by you or useful to you for any information. But unlike when we talk about gas station dope or some of the other more fun stuff, this is more like a science class. which is fine. I mean, knowledge isn't always pretty. So let's jump right in, shall we? Okay, so on the first page here, the first thing we run into, jumped ahead a slide, try that again. So first page, we have the introduction, and this is basically a brief description of what it is, list of drugs, its intended use, and basically what it is again. It's a lot of different wording of the same thing. So for example, the first paragraph, package insert for testing any combination of the following drugs, goes on to list all the drugs. And then the next section says a single one-step screening test for the simultaneous qualitative detection of, and again, it lists all the drugs. Real quick on definitions, since we hit this one first. So you can see it was called a qualitative detection. So qualitative means yes or no. It's binary, positive or negative. The opposite of quantitative would be qualitative. And that would be where you get a level, typically from a laboratory test. You see the THC is positive, that doesn't really tell you anything. Send it to the lab, they can tell you the actual concentration. They can give you that quantitative information. As we get a little further, we're going to run into something called semi-quantitative, and I'll go into a little more detail when we do indeed reach that part. And then the really fun part, the full definition. The one-step multi-drug test screen cup urine is a lateral flow. Okay, so lateral flow meaning it is reliant upon liquid flowing in a single direction, in this case urine. And it goes via capillary action running up regardless of gravity, up the strips. Chromatographic meaning colored. Remember, your results are positive and negative. It's a colored line. That's where that chromatographic comes into play. Immunoassay. An immunoassay, basically by definition, is a procedure for detecting or measuring substances through their properties as antigens or antibodies. So basically, this is a chemical reaction that we're talking about here, based on biological function of immunity. When you take a substance into your body, you can create antigens and antibodies, and those react with one another in order to tell the body how to deal with the substance that's been introduced into the body. And that brings up another interesting concept, which we'll get when we get to that page. And then again, it mentions that it's a qualitative detection for multiple drugs, drug metabolites, and alcohol at the following cutoff concentrations in urine, which leads us to the next section. So this is a section I call calibrators. This basically tells you what the target is. So in other words, what the test was designed to detect first and foremost. And then it'll also tell you in the section at what cutoff level that we would expect that to trigger a positive result. Concentration level or cutoff level is basically how much of a weight of a substance is within a liquid volume, of liquid, in this case, urine. So for example, now another thing to point out here is when they print these product inserts, and this product insert is not for every single cup that you're going to run into. They're all going to be a little bit different. This is one line of tests from one manufacturer. I have 50 more of these saved on my hard drive, and I could use any of them. This just happens to be the newest one and probably the most thorough, so this is the one I decided to go with. They're all going to have very similar information, but this one worked best for our purposes of demonstration here today. So to give you an idea, in this case, it shows on this line of cups, they have a fentanyl, where the calibrator is fentanyl, and that would be triggered at 300 nanograms per milliliter. They had another option where it's fentanyl, the calibrator is fentanyl, but it's detected at 200 nanograms per milliliter, less concentration, meaning it's more sensitive. Another option with fentanyl is the calibrator, which is, now is going to be triggered at positive at 100 nanograms, so it's an even more sensitive test than that. And then after that, we have two of the newer versions of fentanyl where they use norfentanyl, which is the primary metabolite of fentanyl, as the target substance, and they're able to bring it to a much lower concentration. So while this isn't an even comparison with these, with the norfentanyl cutoffs aren't an even comparison with the fentanyl cutoffs, it still tends to come down in sensitivity, making it more sensitive, or it's more likely to read for smaller concentrations. And again, I'm not going to go through each of these one at a time. I just want to give you an overall idea what this section is indicative of. And then this last section here is something I hammer to you guys. If you've ever done a training with me on the drug testing cups, or really any conversation probably that you have with me, this assay provides only a preliminary analytical test result. A more accurate alternative method must be used in order to obtain a confirmed analytical result. So remember, we're talking about this being a chemical reaction. A chemical reaction does tend to have the possibility of cross-reactivity. So they're saying they want a different methodology, in this case, gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, which is more of a visual result as opposed to a chemical result. It's basically infallible. So that's why it is always preferred to use this just as the preliminary, just as screen, and then follow it up with a more quantifying test. All right, and then we go on to the next section, which is basically just a summary of substances. I'm not going to read again all of these, but just to give you an idea of what kind of information is included in here. I'm going to do the cocaine instead of methamphetamine because it's a little shorter. So cocaine is a potent central nervous system stimulant and a local anesthetic. Initially, it brings about extreme energy and restlessness while gradually resulting in tremors, oversensitivity, and spasms. So again, it tells you what these substances do. It's a little helpful piece of information in case you might have suspicions of use of somebody and you're kind of new to this. You don't really know exactly what a certain drug might cause what sort of behavior. So this is going to break down each one and tell you, in a sense, what they are, how they're used, other information that might be useful. In this case, it says cocaine is often self-administered by nasal inhalation, also known as snorting or insufflation, intravenous injection, and freebase smoking. It is excreted through the urine in a short time, primarily as, I'm not going to try this one because I never get it right, but it's the primary metabolite of cocaine. And again, it says here it's a major metabolite of cocaine, has a longer biological half-life, 5 to 8 hours, than cocaine, and can generally be detected for 24 to 48 hours after cocaine exposure. So real quick on this half-life, this is a scientific measure of how long a substance takes to break down in the human body. Really has almost zero to do with drug detection time. In other words, this information is really completely unrelated to anything we do with drug testing, but they do like to include whatever scientific data in here that may be helpful for somebody. So while it looks interesting and it's kind of a cool principle, and principle if you want to study into that, again, I could do hours on that. It really doesn't relate in any meaningful way to window of detection on a urine drug test. But they tell you right here, it can generally be detected for about 24 to 48 hours. And again, if we went back to that first list where it talks about the calibrator, we would see the metabolite listed as the calibrator because it can generally be detected longer. So, what we really want is to be able to detect something as long as possible. So this goes and breaks that down for each of the substances that may be included in this product line. Then it gives a section on adulterant testing, which we also call specimen validity. I have blogs on this. I have webinars on this. There's a lot of information that is on our website that you can go to get more details on adulterant or specimen validity testing. But just real quick, I'll give you the gist of it. The adulterant test strip contains chemically treated reagent pads. Observation of the color change on the strip compared to the color chart provides a semi-quantitative screen for oxidant-specific gravity, blah, blah. So this is why I wanted to talk before about semi-quantitative. And this is actually going to come up again. But so when we talked about qualitative being a yes or no, binary positive, negative, we talked about qualitative, where you're going to get a nice whole number, a real number as a level, as an amount of concentration in that specimen. The semi-quantitative is going to give you a level range. So if you use the adulteration before, it's a colored pad. The color isn't going to be a nice digital printout telling you exactly what that concentration is. It's going to say, oh, it's between this color blue and this color blue. It's going to fall in this range. So it's not only a qualitative test. It's not just a positive or negative, but it's not giving you a whole number. So we call that semi-quantitative. So that's an interesting reason to bring that up. And again, if you want more information on the adulterant, it's in there. Watch the recording of the webinar that we did. There's a bunch of other information on our website as well that you can find that is very helpful. Or schedule a training with me. Call your consultant. We'd be glad to spend time to do it with you. All right, next we go on to talk about principles and reagents. And it also talks a little bit about, mainly the reagents here. And I do want to make a point of saying that these are not vegan. Got to be upfront with you. We're going to skip to the bottom of this page where it says each test line in the cup contains mouse monoclonal antibody coupled particles and corresponding drug protein conjugates. A goat antibody is employed at each control line. So yes, they do extract living antibodies and antigens from animals. Does not harm the animal any more than them being, except the fact that obviously they're in captivity and they get poked with needles, but it's not costing them their life or their health, but it is something that needs to be extracted in order to make these tests function, which is the way an immunoassay works. It's that chemical reaction that relies on an immune response. And what that immune response is really all about is something called competitive binding. If I try to read this, it would probably just make it more confusing. So look at it if you want. But the general gist of competitive binding is the drugs will attach to an antibody. The dyes are attached to an antigen. If there are no drugs and they do not, cancel out that antigen, then that dye is able to come through to the surface of the strip, and that's where you're going to get your negative line. If there is drug antigen present, it will completely overtake the antibody on the dye, and that dye will not come to the surface of test, meaning you'll get no line, indicating a positive result. And that is, bargain basement, most simple way of describing competitive binding. So actually a little bit more to it than that, including, the suspended colloidal gold particles, and there's a lot more. It's amazingly complex for such a relatively inexpensive device that we use every day and take for granted. I mean, it really is incredible the amount of technology that allows these things to work, and give us all an amazing tool so that we're able to do our jobs properly. So instead of getting frustrated that that one test doesn't work properly, just be amazed that they exist at all, and you're living in a place where this thing is possible and relatively just ubiquitous. So worst things that could happen is what I'm saying. All right, next we get into some of the more boring stuff. We got into precautions, storage, and collection. The first one, precautions, and some of this is obvious. This particular line of cups that we're talking about today is for forensic use only. That means it's only to be used for non-medical, non-medical treatment decisions. There's an overseeing body called CLIA. If you're in healthcare, you'll know that one a lot. If you're not, it doesn't apply to you, so you probably don't know anything about it. But it's just this particular line that we're looking at today happens to be forensic use only. Some other basic tips: do not use after expiration date. The test cup should remain in the sealed pouch until used. I'm always, stickler for that one. Excuse me. Talk about potentially hazardous materials and handled in the same manner as an infectious agent. I have not seen a single city, state, jurisdiction have any specific requirements about disposal of a test cup, except for the general wisdom of dumping the urine from it before you put the cup in the garbage. That's common sense at this point. Some other, storage basically says keep in the package, keep it room temp or refrigerated, do not freeze, stable through the expiration date, keep from direct sunlight, moisture, and heat. Again, some of these things are just obvious. This section is actually interesting. So specimen collection and preparation. So when to collect urine for the test. So this is very interesting here. It's kind of buried in this other non-exciting information, but this is important to keep in mind. When you ingest a substance, it's going to take some time before that substance or its components or its metabolites to begin being excreted out through your urine. So let's say somebody walks into an appointment with you and you see them pop a pill as they walk through the door. There's going to be nothing in their urine for at least a couple hours to give you any indication if that was a substance or not. It's not going to detect if somebody's under the influence at that time. It's only going to detect something that's at least a couple of hours old. Now, some drugs like cocaine, which is either done intravenously, some of these things get into your bloodstream a little bit quicker. Some of them metabolize a little quicker. So I think this 2 to 7 hours is probably kind of like a safety margin. I've seen things obviously come out positive much sooner, but some things like ETG can take a little bit longer than that. So this is probably could use to be updated. Let's put it that way. How to collect the urine, obviously, open the cup, give them the urine. Specimen storage, stored again 2 to 8 Celsius for up to 40 hours prior to testing. So in other words, if you collect a specimen and you don't want to run the test at that point, you can store it either refrigerated or frozen. Frozen specimen should be thawed and mixed well before testing. And I'll take that a step further and say it should be brought back down to room temperature before testing. That's also important. All right, next, instructions. Again, we have hours and hours on instructions, so I'm not going to go through this with you, but it's nice to know that this is always there for you in your box of tests. You can pull this out at any time if you get stuck or you forget something you're looking at. The only thing I will also hammer home is what they put in all caps here: do not interpret results after 10 minutes. Again, you're supposed to read the test at 5 minutes and not after 10. If you have a result that you need to discuss with someone at a later time, or you want to share with us, snap a photo. I mean, almost everybody has a camera in their pocket these days, so it's not really a big ask, I don't think. All right, next we get to limitations, and there's more on this, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but this is more than anything a disclaimer. Provides only a qualitative preliminary result. We already talked about that. Possibility that technical or procedural errors could make a mistake. Adulterants can affect it. Positive result does not indicate level or intoxication. Again, this is all stuff that we've kind of gone over in here, and that I have, in other formats on the website. Test does not distinguish between drugs of abuse and certain medications. Positive result might be obtained from certain foods or food supplements. Poppy seeds, great example of that. So yeah, again, there's a lot of been said about this already, but I know this is information that you've got at your fingertips should you ever need it. All right, now we get to the big question. This one I get all the time. And again, unfortunately, we're not going to spend all day with the minutia of breaking this all down, but I want you to have an understanding of how this information works and how this information is often related when you have questions about it. So this page is called accuracy, but really falls under performance characteristics. So theoretically, when most people are asking for accuracy, what they really want to know is the overall performance characteristics. So what that's going to require is accuracy, what we're looking at here, and precision, which is what we'll look at next. And just real quick, I'll show you the first one here, this amphetamine 1000 panel. What they basically did, they took 80, what I call blind specimen. They just gave these specimens to different operators, 3 different operators, I believe. Yeah, 3 operators. And they were supposed to just run the test blindly. They didn't know what was in the specimen, record the results, and then have it go to GCMS. And so this shows the agreement between what the GCMS found. So on this first AMP panel, which is pretty obsolete anyway, on positive specimen, it agreed with GCMS 93.3% of the time. On negative specimen, it agreed 100% of the time. So the cumulative accuracy rating for this AMP panel is 96.7%. But again, that's not the whole story. I'll show you why. So there are 2 different things we're talking about again, accuracy and precision. So if you see on this left target, all of these, we'll call these little X's arrows, all these little arrows came very close to that bullseye, but they weren't really necessarily so close to one another. So they're accurate, but they're not precise. So in the second example, we see that they're all not nearly as close to the bullseye as the high accuracy results, but they were repeatable. And that's the real thing. You want repeatability. In science, repeatability is key. If you can't get it to happen consistently in a laboratory, it's not good data. Something's wrong. Something is missing from your experiment. So that's why accuracy and precision really should go hand in hand. And then just really interesting thing to know about this precision chart, just because we've talked about this a bunch of times too, is as you can see, the test is basically perfect when we get from 25% to 100% above cutoff. And it gets, again, close to 100% when we get below 25 to below 100% cutoff. The only time we really see any failures is when it is right at the cutoff level. So I've said this before, the hardest thing to do with any instant test is to set the cutoff level exactly correctly. It's just one of the big failings of an immunoassay like this. It's really not possible. Now, most of the time, you're going to see that the manufacturers will decide to err on the side of sensitivity. In other words, if your THC cutoff, for example, is 25, most people would rather see a positive at 20 than a negative at 30. In other words, they'd rather see it be a little bit below cutoff and still give a positive than have it be just above cutoff and give a negative. It's a fine argument if you're on the other side of that coin, but generally the consensus is let's play it safe on the side of caution, on the side of too sensitive as opposed to not sensitive enough. So that's where that horrible looking line at cutoff is. And keep in mind, it's just the nature of an instant test. I could, again, pull out the other 50 inserts I have, and all the numbers are going to look pretty close. All right, and then lastly, we have analytical specificity. This is one of my favorite sections. So basically what we're doing here is we're going through each drug. We're listing the concentration cutoff of the target, typically the first one on the list, and at what level it should cause a positive result. Now, as we can see here, this is a methamphetamine panel. The calibrator, which is D-methamphetamine, is going to be detected at 1,000 nanograms. The next thing on our list is MDEA, which is the early version of MDMA. Now, that's not methamphetamine, but should we be upset that it's detecting this other illicit substance? For the most part, we don't call these cross reactions. Part of the same drug class, also another drug of abuse. Most people are not going to complain that their benzo panel is also picking up, not just Xanax, but Valium and possibly Ultram as well. So we kind of like when that happens, and whenever possible, we go that route. But sometimes what happens is you do things like this. See here, this is ranitidine, which is Zantac. And we've not heard of it. It's basically an over-the-counter medicine for acid reflux, I believe. Has nothing to do with the methamphetamine class of drugs. So this is something we would call a true cross-reactivity. And if you ever wondered about what other substances are known to cross-react, you can refer to this analytical specificity section, and it will list all of the ones that, again, have been known, that can be repeatably produced in a laboratory, that we know is causing a cross-reaction. Obviously some random reactions that can't necessarily be explained, but the ones that we are sure of, the ones that are repeatable, those are the ones that we include in our product insert. And then you can see here we talked about the cocaine. Of course, there's the benzo 300 that we talked about earlier. All right, I see we have a question. Let's go ahead and get to that. Ron Williams, I need my glasses for this part. And the insert shows all these. How we can tell which one is on our cup? Oh yeah, good point. Thank you, Mr. Williams. So yeah, again, this particular product line, the full product line, is represented by this particular insert. You probably are not going to have all 5 of those fentanyls on your test cup. The best place to find this information, really two places. One would be on the white foil pouch. There's a stamp on there that has all the product information, tell you which, it'll show fentanyl, and it'll show you which of the calibrator and what cutoff was used. So all that information is there. And then also on the outer box of the cups, on that label as well, you'll see it's basically the same stamp. So however you look at it, whether you're picking out the box or you're picking up just the individual wrap cup, you will have that information easily at your fingertips. All right. I don't see that we have any more questions, which is good. I took you 27 minutes, which again, I do appreciate it. I'd never like to go too long just because your time is important. I want to respect that. Again, if you want to have a deep dive on any of this information, reach out to your consultant, reach out to me. Let's schedule something. I'll give you 90 minutes, but it has to be on your request. I would never do that to you, on taking it here. So, all right, great. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. Again, if you think of questions after the fact, just know your consultant will be reaching out. We'll be able to get any of the questions taken care of at that point. And until next time, keep on testing. Thank you.